Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 920 for January 31st, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
I just looked at the numbers of bottles sold on eBay, whatever, B12345. And then you go on social media and you go, well, there's bottle B12345, except it's full again and sealed again. Occasionally, they make a mistake and there'll be two of the same bottle. But because even the handwriting is different. And no, it's just a fake.
Adam Herz is a whiskey lover and collector, but he has also become an expert on the seamier side of whiskey collecting, the nasty business of counterfeit whiskeys. He's been uncovering fakes and outing the fakers for several years now, and he'll join me later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and...
Right now, the ABC has given us a grace period, if you will, to work with us while the legislature is in session to get that fixed. So that's not a want, that's a need.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Well, the holidays have come and gone, and hopefully you had enough good whiskey to share with friends and family. If your whiskey shelf is looking a little thin, look no further than Dewar's Double Double 21 Year to add to the New Year's collection. Double-aged and finished in the finest Oloroso sherry casks, this one may not last. Find it at a store near you.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast. Oh. And equally nails, apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore, and we'll begin with a story that we broke on the WhiskyCast website this weekend. Hundreds, if not thousands, of private barrel selections come out of Kentucky distilleries every year for retailers, restaurants, bars, and even individuals all over the world. But unless state lawmakers take action in the next couple of months, the supply of private barrel selections will disappear faster than a bottle of Pappy Vanwinkle at list price. That's because the state's liquor regulators have warned that current state laws don't allow for private barrel picks because the concept was never contemplated when those laws were written. For instance, the laws don't make any difference between someone who visits a distillery to pick a barrel and someone who just wants to visit the gift shop and buy a bottle. Kentucky Distillers Association President Eric Gregory explains the problem.
There's lots of things in statutes that just don't jive with the process. Like, for instance, distilleries are limited in sampling law to 1.75 ounces a day. And if you've ever done a private barrel selection, you know that you're probably sampling more than 1.75 ounces, especially if you're tasting from multiple barrels, right? So we've got to carve that out as an exemption. And then we're limited to selling a standard 9-liter case per person per day. And the ABC says, well, at the end of the day, a private barrel selection is more than, 150, 200 bottles. It, violates that. And then this was one that really kind of caught us off guard. Tied house laws. So obviously a manufacturer cannot give or promote any one retail establishment because it could be seen as them leveraging that to sell more of their product through that establishment, right? It's like an incentive or a bonus. And with the way it works in Kentucky, if you're a consumer and you buy a private barrel selection, especially if you're from out of state, you tell the distillery to work with the wholesaler to send it to whatever package store that's near you through the 3-tier system, right? The ABC considers that a violation of the tied house system. And we looked into it and said, okay, if that's a concern, let's address that. So we're going to have to deal with that in legislation as well.
Wow, that pretty much shuts down the entire program.
Yeah, it would certainly chill private barrel selection. So again, this is why we're urgently seeking a resolution within the legislature. And it's going to have an emergency clause. So as soon as it's signed by the governor, if we're fortunate enough to get it passed, it would take effect immediately, and there wouldn't be any. We wouldn't miss a beat in private barrel selections.
Westport Whiskey and Wine in Louisville has been one of the most aggressive buyers of private barrel picks in Kentucky. Owner Chris Zaborowski understands the concerns over tied house restrictions.
For example, if I'm buying a whole barrel, that means somebody else can't get that, that same whiskey. And that's pushing the interpretation. If somebody really wanted to push it, that's, where it would be cited. And everybody, all three tiers of the industry here in Kentucky are behind, just getting it written out so that nobody can, raise the specter of causing a problem.
How much of an impact would it have on you if you had to stop doing private barrel selections? Because I know you sell a lot of them.
Well, last year we did over 60 barrels here at the store. So, just use a conservative number, if that was, about $8,000, a barrel, that's a fairly impactful number. It's, almost $500,000 in sales. And multiply that by all the other retailers and the restaurants and the bars that do their private barrel picks, and you're talking about a boatload of money. Yep, that's true. And that's, that's why I said, it's not quite the, a problem in search of a solution, or a solution in search of a problem. It's just getting the language cleaned up so that no one can create the problem. And it's sort of that law of unintended consequences. Everybody thought barrel selections were a great idea, and then state comes in and says, whoops. Again, it really wasn't the state ABC that came. It's somebody who brought it to the attention of the ABC that the wording is not quite right. And I think this is a consequence of, and I'm not trying to be slanderous in this way of saying it, but I think, with the distilleries now wanting to be able to sell single barrels directly, somebody started looking at the language of the way the way this is written, and that's where I think it came from. One of the things about these private barrel picks is it lets you differentiate yourself from all the other competition in the market when you have these, right? We were one of the early adapters. I mean, we got the first commercial, outside of a family member from Brown Foreman. Mac Brown got the first single barrel of Old Forester. We got the second one. But we've gotten a lot of firsts for a lot of different distilleries. I'm one of the first ones to get barrels out of Heaven Hill. We were the first ones to get barrels out of, Jim Beam. I mean, we've been after this program, from the very beginning, and it was just a point of distinction for us. Like I said, turn that switch off, it'd be devastating for our business. The situation may not be unique to Kentucky, though. Most states have limits on how much a visitor can sample or buy during a visit. For instance, Texas limits distillers to selling a single visitor just 2 bottles per month. That means the impact of this could be felt nationwide. What's more, federal regulations also cover the tied house issue. While there has been no guidance from the TTB on how that might affect private barrel picks, the agency has been getting more aggressive in enforcing the rules when it comes to tied house relationships. Kentucky's General Assembly is scheduled to meet through mid-April. We'll keep you posted as this story develops. Now, there is some good news out of bourbon country. Despite the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on travel, Kentucky bourbon tourism rebounded during 2021. Kentucky Bourbon Trail member distilleries gave more than 1.5 million tours to visitors during 2021. That's just 13% off the pre-COVID record high in 2019 of 1.7 million tours. And as Eric Gregory puts it, that number could easily have been much higher.
Jim Beam was down 10 months while they were constructing the new visitor center experience. Michter's was down 9 months. And everybody's on limited tour sizes still because of COVID. And most distilleries, just because of staffing issues, are shut down a couple days a week right now, and have been for months. So, no, we are pleasantly surprised and thrilled that at these numbers, and we think 2022 is going to be a record year.
Any unusual stories out of the visitor numbers? Anybody get new records or anything like that this year?
The craft trail was really booming, and we analyzed that pretty hard to see what was going on there. And, mostly we believe that that, the craft trail distilleries, especially if they're near a larger distillery, have always been kind of a relief valve. So if you go to a larger distillery and they're booked or they don't have a tour at that time, just a mile or two away, there's usually a great craft distillery to visit. And with some of the distilleries shut down, like, Jim Beam and Mitchell's, I think they cut all the excess and the overflow. So that was really nice to see the craft distilleries getting high attendance numbers. And plus, a lot of them are offering really new experiences, like Log Still, with the concerts and things. So really good numbers out of them, and that's a really good growth area for Kentucky.
Buffalo Trace Distillery is not part of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, but reported similar results for 2021 with a new record of more than 340,000 visitors. That's up 16% over 2019. We have talked about supply chain problems affecting the whiskey industry, and no one appears to be exempt, not even the world's largest whiskey maker. Diageo reported financial results for the first half of its fiscal year the other day, and overall sales were up, including a 27% increase globally in sales for its Scotch whiskies. However, sales of North American whiskies were only up by 2%, and Diageo Chief Financial Officer Lavanya Chandrasekhar cited supply problems for two of its key North American brands.
One is on certain parts of our portfolio, we're seeing constraints in terms of aged liquid. That's true on Crown Royal, and that's true on tequila liquid constraints. And then on Bullet, we have a very specific issue around glass, and that really is impacting just the Bullet bottle, which is a very bespoke bottle. And we're working with our strategic bottle supplier on that brand to resolve those issues.
Meanwhile, NOLA.com's Gambit Food and Drink section reports that not only are Crown Royal and tequila in short supply in New Orleans, but the area is also suffering from a shortage of Jameson Irish whiskey. Pernod Ricard's Irish flagship is apparently in short supply just a month before Mardi Gras celebrations on March 1st. That's critical because Mardi Gras celebrations have been canceled the past 2 years because of the pandemic, but are scheduled to take place in the coming weeks. In other news, Scotland's Eden Mill Distillery will expand to a new facility with the sale of the company to the private equity firm Inverleith LLP. Co-founder Paul Miller will continue to lead Eden Mill while the new distillery is built on the Eden campus of St. Andrews University. It's expected to open in 2023. Inverleith is led by former Scotch Malt Whisky Society Managing Director Paul Skipworth and hopes to take Eden Mill's whiskies and other spirits into more global markets. No purchase price was disclosed. On the legal front, Uncle Nearest Tennessee Whiskey and one of its executives are facing a sexual harassment lawsuit from a former New York City area sales representative. We are not naming names yet, since the company has yet to file its formal reply to the lawsuit in Brooklyn Federal Court. But the woman who filed the lawsuit claims that her boss touched her inappropriately during the distillery's opening celebrations last June. While Uncle Nearest and the executive have not filed their replies to the lawsuit yet, founder Fawn Weaver told me she hired an outside investigations firm to look into the allegations and could find no evidence of harassment. The executive remains with the company. And finally, happy trails to Angel's Envy co-founder Wes Henderson. Thursday, Wes announced his retirement from the distillery and brand he founded 13 years ago with his father, the late Lincoln Henderson. Wes has decided that now is the time to spend more time with his grandchildren, though no one I have talked with believes he'll stay on the sidelines for long. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
A program note for you now. We have not just one, but two happy hour live webcasts coming up this Friday night. Our original plan was to have the guys from Off Track with Hinch and Rossi, James Hinchcliffe, Alexander Rossi, and Tim Durham at 5 p.m. But a scheduling glitch means that they're not available until 5 p.m. West Coast time, which is 8 p.m. New York time. So we're going to do our regular live webcast at 5 p.m. New York time. Jeff Arnett of Company Distilling in Tennessee will join me. Of course, he is best known for his years as the master distiller at Jack Daniel's. Company Distilling is just getting started in Tennessee, and we'll get an update from Jeff. And at 8 p.m. New York time, 5 p.m. West Coast time, the Off Track gang will join us from the West Coast, along with their pal, fellow IndyCar driver Marco Andretti, to taste a flight of whiskeys. Double the drams, double the fun. You can watch it all live on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. We have an update from our friends at Whiskey Galore in Christchurch, New Zealand. Just hours after last week's podcast dropped, they sent word that the New Zealand government's latest change to pandemic-related health restrictions means that next month's Dramfest will have to be postponed. Look for a new date to be announced in the coming weeks. In addition, Whiskey Live in Dublin, Ireland has now been pushed back from next month until the weekend of June 10th and 11th. In the meantime, we heard from Chris Zaborowski during the news. Westport Whiskey and Wine has a Woodford Reserve bourbon and chocolate pairing session coming up on February 9th. Great Jones Distillery in New York City has its first Valentine's Under the Stills dinner on the 14th. Glasgow's Whiskey Festival is still on for the 19th in Glasgow, Scotland, and the Newcastle Whiskey Festival is on the 26th in Newcastle, England. Keep in mind, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you may have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. Catoctin Creek co-founder Scott Harris is leading his annual Art of the Cocktail class again this winter online, and the fun happens each Friday night. You can get all the details at CatoctinCreekDistilling.com. Catoctin Creek reminds you to always drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. When something becomes collectible, sooner or later, usually sooner, someone will try to make an easy buck with a counterfeit version. Fakes have been a problem in the Scotch whisky world for many years, and we have done a number of episodes on the problem. But over the last several years, there has been a growing number of fake bourbons hitting the secondary market. Our friend Clay Risen of the New York Times did a story on the problem earlier this month. He joined us on the Happy Hour live webcast the other night.
In some ways, it's not surprising, right? I mean, anytime you get a rapidly, valuating, a rapidly rising value in an asset that people don't know much about outside of a core group of collectors, you're just, you're hanging out a sign for scammers to come along, especially when there's not a lot of, when you have this secondary market, which is we call it a gray market. It's a black market. And so there's no enforcement mechanism outside of the other people who, could ostracize you, which if you're a scammer is not much of a price to pay. And the upside is huge. It's surprising to talk about, but actually as a concept, it's completely predictable.
You can listen to the entire discussion with Clay Risen and Maggie Kimbrell of American Whiskey Magazine in the podcast version of the webcast later this week. The on-demand video replay is available right now at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. Wait until you're done with the podcast before you watch it, though. Now, one of the people featured in Clay's story is Los Angeles-based whiskey collector Adam Herz. He's become an expert in spotting fake whiskeys of all kinds, and often winds up confronting the counterfeiters who try to unload those fakes on unsuspecting whiskey lovers. I spent some time with Adam on a Zoom call the other day. How did you get into whiskey collecting to begin with?
The short story is I got into whiskey collecting through tequila. I really enjoyed margaritas in college, was like, what's that flavor? Turned out to be the actual tequila. And people were like, well, if you like tequila, then you should probably try, some scotch and maybe some bourbon. And it just snowballed. Collecting for me just means I buy more than I consume or can share. It's not, I think I have probably a total of 5 bottles that I bought to say, I'm going to put this on a shelf and stare at it,
Which is an admirable goal, but...
Well, yeah, I shouldn't ding people that collect for the sake of collecting. I certainly understand it, but I think I started in about 2006 when I started to get really serious. And, it was plentiful then. So I used to make fun of people that would post their pictures of, antique collection, this many bottles deep. And it's like, why? I can go to the store and just get it. Little
did we know at the time.
Yeah, little did we know, right?
You've become known as sort of the expert on counterfeiting of these whiskeys, though. How did that come about? Because that's not something anybody normally would seek to become expert in. You sort of fall into it by chance, don't you?
Yes, entirely sort of by chance and circumstance. So when I started getting into Scotch, actually, is my preferred drink, I got a group of us together. We would meet at least once a month and I'll chip in. And anyways, we started finding various vintage bottles, especially US releases. And there was no really way to date them. And so we started researching things all the way from, advertisements to federal code to figure out what clues can we, date these bottles with. And now a lot of people know that stuff. I mean, it's pretty commonplace to know about glass codes and things like that. Anyhow, what ended up happening is it first started with some auctioneers where they would post bottles for sale. And I'd say, you dated that one wrong, and they didn't know apparently. And so that sort of made me more critical in general of anything for sale. And when Facebook and the social media blew up with this whole bourbon phenomenon, at the same time, I saw a whole lot of empty bottles being sold on eBay for a whole lot of money. Like nobody's going to pay $300 for a piece of trash unless, there's some advantage to it. And so I basically just set out to prove that these were being refilled and resold, which was actually pretty easy when I did it.
So how do you do it? How do you prove that somebody took those bottles off of eBay, refilled them with cheap stuff, and then finished them off to make it look like the real thing? Like a hoppy Vanwinkle or something like that, or a mild turkey.
The Hoppy Van Twinkle brand is kind of was the first thing that look, you take Pappy 23, those all have handwritten numbers on the fronts. And so that was where I started. I just looked at the numbers of bottles sold on eBay, whatever, B12345. And then you go on social media and you go, well, there's bottle B12345, except it's full again and sealed again. Occasionally they make a mistake and there'll be 2 of the same bottle, but because even the handwriting is different. And no, it's just a fake. And so that's one way to tell. Sometimes there's no way to tell. We only know sometimes that we have cases of fakes because they came from someone who only sells fakes. And some of them were obvious fakes and some of them were perfect.
How did you find out they were fakes if they were perfect?
You open it up and test the juice. So with something like Pappy 15, if it's not 107 proof, Buffalo Trace doesn't make that kind of mistake,
No. They're not going to make that mistake. The Vanwinkles aren't going to make that mistake. Anybody with a reputation to protect isn't going to make that mistake.
Exactly. So sometimes you can tell that a bottle's a fake because it's been sloppily resealed. There are always refills here in the U.S. Overseas, really good fake artistic Scotch is a thing, single malts. Here, it's still people buying empties or getting them from a bar or a friend, and they refill it. So that means the wax looks crappy. They can't duplicate the wax, or they've screwed up the seal in some way. But there are ways to do it that's truly perfect where you can't tell. And you don't know until you crack it open. And sometimes you crack it open and you still don't know. You go, it's just suspect.
You mentioned scotches, and we've known about counterfeit scotches for a number of years now, and people going to all sorts of lengths to not only counterfeit them, but to also uncover those counterfeits. I never thought we'd see people carbon dating whiskeys, frankly, to prove that they were actually bottled after 1945 or so, because you can tell by the level of radiation in the whiskey itself.
Yes.
But at what point did bourbon become counterfeitable, so to speak? Was it in this last 5-year period?
I would, I found...
Or let me put it this way. Yeah. At what point did it become profitable to counterfeit bourbon?
Oh, I don't know. It's always profitable to counterfeit bourbon. But look, if I started seeing the uptick on empties pricing on eBay US in about 2014, and it wasn't until 2016 that I said, okay, I'm just going to find one because I had naysayers. And I was like, well, you just shut up. Here, explain this. And that was that. So it's been going pretty hardcore for at least 5 years.
And you have not only naysayers, but people that you've outed as counterfeiters that are not happy with you, are they?
Well, I think they're not happy with themselves. Most of the people who I talk to who end up being counterfeiters, they know they screwed up. A lot of these people are they're kind of like you or I, where they've been in the hobby for a while. They feel like hard times have hit. With COVID, at the start of COVID, there was a big uptick in faking. People felt the crunch and said, you know what? I'm just going to do this once or twice. And once you get a taste of that easy money, they don't stop. So I call them like suburban dads. There's the suburban dad fakers, where it's really just, you go look at the guy's Facebook profile and you're like, what is this guy doing? And when you sort of say, hey, look, here's all this evidence. Can you explain this? They sort of tuck tail and just stay pretty quiet and ashamed,
But then there are those who are so blatant and make a business out of it and really take it to extremes, don't they?
There are, some of these even like sort of suburban types took it to extremes. But there are professional fakers as well that are using, professional equipment to reseal bottles. They've been operating for years. It's not a secret really who they are. I imagine they might even know who I am, but like I that's something I have no interest in, because like those aren't people that are in sort of the community and the circles that you and I might run in. They're just, they're in it just for pure money and they're selling it through Craigslist and whatever. And me getting tangled up with that is the same as like, I'm not interested in like getting involved with like real criminals, I guess.
You don't want to get your legs broken.
I like my limbs the way they are. And so even when I hesitate to use the word bust, but even when it's sort of these hobbyists that move into faking, I try and stay neutral a little as a reporter, not really as an investigator, although it ends up being that way because a lot of times I'm past information. One nice thing about this hobby is there's people in all sorts of disciplines and with various talents and resources that say, hey, this doesn't really make sense. And so I'll just call the guy or message the guy, you want to talk about this? And they always do, because they always think they've got great excuses planned, but they don't. I don't know.
Everybody has a plan until you come knocking on their door, basically.
I mean, you know, yeah, I guess so. It's funny to hear it that way, but maybe.
Is it fair to say that we could shut most of this down in about 2 seconds flat if eBay would just ban the sale of empty bottles?
Well, it's fair to say we could shut a lot of it down, but there's nothing to prevent, if I'm faking, there's nothing to prevent me from going to all my neighborhood bars and saying, hey, hey, dude, like, I'll give you $100 for your trash, like all the high-end bottles, every week or whatever. What bartender's not going to do that? By the way, a lot of the people selling empties in volume on eBay are bartenders. So, it'll curtail it, but it's certainly not going to stop it. I mean, those empties have to go somewhere, and they'll just solicit. They'd probably solicit on Craigslist or something. ISO empty bottles in search of.
Is there anything that the whiskey makers could do to make this harder to counterfeit?
Yeah, there's enormous amounts of things they could do. Look at what Macallan did. There was, frankly, they just got embarrassed. There was a big thing with Dave Broom and those guys. What was that? I don't know, close to 20 years ago. And I think it was Dave. But anyhow, look what Macallan did. They have holograms over their seals now that are much more difficult to duplicate than if they weren't there. What the distilleries should be doing is, instead of blaming consumers for wanting to collect and enjoy their product, they could simply make seals that are anti-counterfeit. And that's pretty simple to do. You have branded foils, branded plastic. You can incorporate RFID, which Buffalo Trace is now experimenting with on their antique collection. That stuff works when you do it right. So, yeah, there's steps that can be taken, and it seems like they're starting to. I think I've seen Four Roses do some nice work with their shrink plastic. So,
have you been burned by fakes?
No, it's funny. I get that question a lot, especially when I started off. People are like, "Oh, well, you probably went after this faker because how much money did you lose? Why don't you help everyone else instead of helping yourself?" And it was just sad because it speaks to the mentality of a lot of people, unfortunately. But no, I've never been burned. I do have one period fake from the 1930s that came in a collection, and I paid a few $100 for it, and I got it, and I was like, God damn it. I can't believe I got fooled. But it happens. But this is a vintage fake, which those are cool in themselves. When you find bottles from the 20s and 30s that were period counterfeits, those are really cool.
Period counterfeits of a counterfeit from that period, or counterfeits actually dating back to that period? No, counterfeits from that period.
Okay. That was counterfeits that were made in during Prohibition or repeal. I like to say it's in my blood. My great grandfather was a bootlegger. My sort of goal is to find one of his counterfeits one day. I'll never.
What was he counterfeiting under? We'll put the word out there. Maybe somebody will hear this and have one.
Well, I've heard this. I mean, my grandfather has told me the stories. He couldn't remember many brands, but I have a very nice collection of medicinal whiskey. And my grandfather points at the Golden Wedding and he says, "That's one of them. We definitely did Golden Wedding." And my grandfather's job as a child was to haul 5-gallon buckets down into their basement of neutral spirits. And they would get the real stuff and cut it 50-50 and then rebottle it. And apparently it was pretty easy to just get more bottles, more labels, and fake tax stamps. So
they weren't exactly sophisticated in the printing technology back then for tax stamps.
I don't know how that worked. I mean, he was like, he literally said you can buy them on street corners back then. So maybe people were selling their governmentally supplied ones. The fake tax stamps I've seen from that era are obviously fake to you or I, but I think to the average consumer, you just tore that sucker off and drank what was inside. Yeah.
What should those of us out there who are consumers in that secondary market, which, let's face it, 90% of the secondary market sales are illegal to begin with, just because of liquor laws. Mm. But if somebody is out there in the secondary market trying to buy a bottle, what would you tell them to be careful of when they're looking at that vintage bottle or even a semi-modern but rare bottle and making sure that it's not a fake?
Well, the best thing to do is, if you're suspicious a bottle's a fake, just Google it. Go to Google Images, and you see hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of what it should look like. Now, you're also going to see variations. Like, distillers don't particularly care. People talk about, the foil isn't the right length. They don't care what length the foil is. If one batch differs a few millimeters or even a half an inch, like, don't worry about that. Look at the ways a bottle can look. And if your bottle doesn't look like any of that, well, then you might have a right to be suspect. But to protect yourself, know who you're buying from and know who they bought from. It's kind of it.
When you're talking about those foil seals, I think about Maker's Mark. They never get the same bottle twice when they do the wax dips.
Yeah.
Because they're all done by hand, so it would be impossible to gauge it based on that.
Exactly. Yeah, what is it supposed to look like, Well, drippy red wax.
Yeah. And every once in a while, they dunk a bottle deliberately all the way down to the label.
Exactly.
They know where it's supposed to go, but they do it just for fun.
The deep dip, yep.
It almost seems to me that whenever there's a market for something, there's always going to be somebody trying to take advantage of that market by pulling off a fake. And I guess it was almost inevitable that this was going to come to bourbon. I mean, we've known about it in Scotch because rare Scotches are expensive and there's money to be made in faking them. But bourbon, as we've all known, was pretty commonplace. I mean, you've mentioned that being able just to buy antique collection bottles and not even have to think about collecting them and hoarding them.
No.
Let alone paying somebody on the secondary market $300 or $400 for one. And that's a limited suggestion, to be honest. But
it's pretty conservative. One of the things that's a little unique to bourbon faking is because there is such a community around it that's sort of socially linked through Instagram, Facebook, whatever. There's a much there's an opportunity for fakers that want to do the low end stuff. You'll see fakes $40, $60, $80, just refills, and they're making, I don't know, $20 or $40. We didn't see that really with single malts in sort of the heyday of the fake Macallan 30s and Grand Reservas and whatnot. There's just this unique phenomenon in bourbon where it's because it's a lot of people who feel like they're trading with friends. One of those, quote, friends decides, he's going to hook him up. They're not going to know the difference. And they've got all these rationalizations. So
you can rationalize anything if you really want to think about it hard enough, or really have a lack of ethics or a lack of grounding in ethical conduct, something like that.
Yeah. Well, look what happened with, I did a piece with the New York Times a few weeks ago. And one of the most popular sort of comments I saw about it was, well, screw all those people that are buying bourbons that are $1,000, because that was the title of the article. It's like your $1,000 bottle might be fake. But, it's weird that there's this tendency to sort of blame the victim, as if they don't have the right to spend their money the way they want to. People collect everything. And I guess I make fun of someone for buying a $5,000 crystal figurine that I think looks stupid, but not really. I don't think something's wrong with them. I understand. They like crystal figurines. What's so hard to understand that somebody decided to spend, hopefully, what's their disposable income on stupidly priced bourbon. You know,
if you've got the money to do it without screwing up the rent payment each month, then go for it. As long as you're not taking food out of your family's mouths, go ahead.
Yeah. What's the harm?
It's not like they're taking bourbon that's retail priced at, say, $70 for a bottle of Old Rip Van Winkle 10-year-old and then selling it on the primary market for $999 the way I saw one local store trying to sell one.
Well, we see that all the time.
Yeah, we see that. And that's considered the free market. That's capitalism.
Yeah. It's the society we live in. It's the way it works. You know, there's supply. It's supply and demand. There's less of it than people want. So, you know, I mean, look at it this way. If Pappy Van Winkle was priced at $5, right? Or if, you know, Rarity number 7 was priced at $20 and someone said to you, I can get you one for $50. You just pay the $50 if you really want it. Like, you know what I mean? Or let me pick an easier scale. If something is $1, if a stick of gum is $1 and someone tells you, you know, this is the best gum in the world, I'll give you this stick of gum for $5, even though it only costs $1. You don't care. All right. And to some people, bourbon's the same way. Art is the same way. Cars are the same way. Crystal figurines and spoons are the same way. They just want the damn thing. And the overage they pay is worth it. So, like, I'm sick and tired of all this people yelling at each other over what they're paying for what they want. Stupid.
As long as the product is legal and they're not hurting their family by doing it, go ahead, spend the money the way they want to.
Yeah, more power to you.
So let's talk about whiskey. What have you tasted lately that you're impressed by?
Oh, lately that I am impressed by. The last new thing I tasted is there's a wild turkey bourbon that's like, I think it's Nottingers or something. Comes in these half bottles. It's a blend of 6 and 8, 10 and 12. You would know better than I. That was pretty good. Kind of, it's cute. Also, now you have to take the label and the presentation into account, because that's how bourbon is. You know, people always say, what's your favorite whiskey? It would be a Scotch. It would be a single malt Scotch. But to pick one, you know, that changes by the week, if not the day or hour.
Yeah, my standard response is I haven't found it yet.
See,
because I'm still tasting them.
You know, that's a fun. I have a similar response, but I've got like the party pooper version, which is I've already tasted it. I just don't know like which one it was. Like every awesome new whiskey, like you finally get to tasting it when people call them unicorns in bourbon. When you finally taste it, it tastes like something else you've already had. Pretty similar. I mean, there's the truth we don't talk about, but to me, it keeps it all just as fun as when I get a group of my friends around and we go, you know what? This doesn't taste that different than the Black Bowmore. This doesn't taste that different than the 70-year-old whatever, except it was $120, you know, and not 50,000 or whatever. That's fun. Another fun.
So let's turn this on its head. What's the worst whiskey you've tried recently?
Recently, the worst whiskey I tried. Gosh. I gotta say, I don't know, Mark. I don't try a lot of things that I don't expect to like. I'll tell you that. There's just too much whiskey out there in too little time. And when I taste something, I want to know it's going to be, you know, it's not going to suck.
Yeah, but you got to taste the ones that suck to appreciate the good ones.
Well, here's the thing. It's like when you're in the right sort of mood, a glass of Jack Daniels is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I don't want to knock the people that work hard at making this stuff either. You know, I especially like usually when I'll do an interview, people want to talk about Pappy Van Winkle, and it's the like coolest fake, and like I don't want to be the guy out there trashing the Van Winkle brand. Like I'm certainly not trying to do that. And so anyway, when you talk about like, yeah, what's the worst whiskey you've tried lately? I don't know. Somebody worked hard at making it, but it's probably some craft piece of garbage. I mean, there's too many of these sort of craft distillers cranking out crappy tasting stuff. Now,
they're doing the best they can.
They're doing the best they can.
And they're trying.
Yeah. And there's plenty that are doing great jobs and like have sort of exceeded expectations and are making some of this more than the sum of its parts. But yeah, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I don't know. I've probably got 40 samples sitting up on my bar here that I'm trying to work through in another. I'm no surge, but I've always got my backlog of stuff I'm trying to catch up on.
That's what I've got behind me too. I've got a backlog I'm trying to catch up to. Yeah,
and this is I have a little club here in LA, and this is all of our shared whiskey behind me. My stuff's in another room. To me, that's what whiskey's about, by the way. Sharing, friends, Once you've been doing it long enough, yeah, you're interested in how it tastes, but we like to go back to the old favorites,
Thanks to Adam Herz for spending some time with us on WhiskyCast In-Depth this week. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. When there is snow on the ground and a cold snap in the air, I want a fire in the fireplace and a peaty whiskey in my glass. So, let's start off with the new Ardbeg Committee release. Fermutation may well be the most unique Ardbeg ever bottled. You see, normally Ardbeg does a 72-hour fermentation cycle, but back in 2007, the distillery's boiler broke down and they couldn't run the stills. So, Bill Lumsden told the distillery team to take the lids off of the 6 washbacks full of fermenting wash and let them sit while repairs were made. That took 3 weeks instead of the usual 3 days. 13 years later, fermutation is the result. It's bottled at 49.4% ABV. The nose is vibrant and fruity with touches of dried flowers and straw, citrus fruits, and a hint of menthol, but not the usual Ardbeg smokiness. That does come alive on the palate, but only in the background to provide a base for lighter notes of citrus, barley sugar, cardamom, and mint. The finish is long with touches of menthol, mint, and citrus on top of that smokier base with hints of creosote and brine. It is not a traditional Ardbeg, but I like it. I'm scoring fermutation a 93. Meanwhile, Seattle's Westland Distillery has now released its final Peat Week expression using peated barley imported from Scotland. Starting next year, Westland will be releasing Solum. It's made with locally grown barley dried with peat from Washington's Olympic Peninsula. The 8th and final release of Peat Week is bottled at 54.4% ABV. The nose has touches of peat, pine, cedar, and a nice maltiness, along with hints of honey, vanilla, and licorice. The taste is peppery with touches of pine needles, honey, vanilla, barley sugar, and a hint of bitter lemon. The finish, long and well-balanced with touches of honey, malt, and smoke. I'm scoring the Westland 2022 Peat Week Single Malt a 93. More tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their Baltimore farm and waterfront distillery. In-person tastings are available once again at the distillery in Baltimore, and you'll also find a variety of virtual tours, tastings, and other experiences at the Sagamore Spirit website. They're offering WhiskyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting, too. When you buy a bottle at your local retailer, a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through it. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com and use the code WhiskyCast, all one word, to access. Please drink responsibly. Bruichladdich has just released its latest Port Charlotte single malt. The 2013 Islay Barley is an 8-year-old single malt using barley grown on 8 different Islay farms and peated at 40 parts per million of phenols. It's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose is peaty and pungent with touches of brine, heather, grilled pineapple, and lemon zest. The taste is nectar thick, with notes of black pepper, peat smoke, brine, and hints of grilled fruits. The finish is long with a gentle balance of fruity character and peat smoke. I'm scoring the Port Charlotte Islay Barley 2013 single malt a 93. Bruichladdich recently released the first single malt scotch made with barley grown using biodynamic farming techniques. I received a sample this week. It's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has touches of lemongrass, citrus, honey, and hints of heather and brine. The taste has notes of lemon pepper, allspice, and a touch of brine, along with heather, honey, and barley sugar. The finish has lingering spices and a citrusy tartness with a nice touch of malt. I'm scoring the Bruichladdich Biodynamic Single Malt a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,200 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
There are 3 whiskeys in the Dewar's Double Double series to explore. Take, for example, our 21 year, an absolute must-try for any whiskey drinker. Our master blender puts this whiskey through a unique 4-stage aging process, a testament to the care and craftsmanship required to make such a fine whiskey. Aged for a minimum of 21 years, this Scotch whiskey is then double-aged and finished in first-fill Oloroso sherry casks. Dark red in color with fruit intertwined with honey on the palate, all packaged in a bottle that is sure to impress. Mark and the good folks of the WhiskyCast team awarded this whiskey an impressive 94-point rating along with an excellent tag when they tasted it back in 2019. Since then, Dewar's Double Double 21 year hasn't stopped racking up awards and accolades. Double Double 21 is a limited release offering from Dewar's, so you'll need to stay on the lookout. Also, keep an eye out for our Double Double 27 year finished in rare Palo Cortado casks and a 32 year finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, a whiskey that took home Whiskey of the Year at the 2020 International Whiskey Competition. Dewar's Double Double. It's a great way to kick off 2022.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky. After we broke the story about the legal issues surrounding private barrel picks in Kentucky, the comments started rolling in on social media. At Mr. McW tweeted this comment after reading the story. Spoke to a legislator buddy of mine. She says that leaders of both chambers love the distilleries, and it is expected to pass. That being said, calling your representative or senator is always a great thing. One of the very first times that I ever sat in on a barrel selection was back in 2007 at Bayway's World of Liquors in Elizabeth, New Jersey, for episode 80 of WhiskyCast. That was a long time ago. Pat McCarthy of Bayway's led the tasting that night, and he weighed in with this on Facebook. As a store that has been selecting barrels of bourbon, Scotch, Irish, cognac, rye, tequila, and American whiskeys for over 15 years, this is something that would not only affect retailers, but consumers who search out barrel picks so they can taste and appreciate the differences the barrel gives to the spirits. It might also affect bourbon tourism, as many people, when they sample barrel picks in our store, decide to travel to Kentucky. Mark Schilling is active in the craft distilling movement and posted this from Texas on our Facebook page. Sales by the barrel are actually banned, at least to the consumer, but since those barrels are converted to bottles and sold through the tiers to the ultimate consumer, at least usually, I don't see this really being a problem. As for the potential tied house issue, I think it would only be an issue if the producer were restricting other retailers from participating in their own private barrel selections. I think Eric is right that it's more a matter of clarification than of the regulators forcing the brakes on it. Finally, a kind comment from Tim Marr in Washington, D.C. at tmarr103 on Twitter. Mark, I envy the perks of your job, but not all the very clear hard work you put into it. Sincerely, few have your talent for this, and I enjoy listening. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskyCast, or just email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the Islay single malt from Hunter Lang & Company that celebrates all of Isla's natural gifts in one bottle. Only those who seek shall find Scarabus. Start your search at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Last week, we kicked off a new series with whiskey makers sharing the stories of how they got started in the whiskey business. The other night, I was on a Burns Night Zoom tasting with Bruichladdie's Adam Herz. He has spent his entire career at Bruichladdie after growing up on the island.
My first job was working with Mary McGregor in the shop. So, to give you a context, when the distillery opened, one of the kind of stalwarts, one of the kind of women who made it all happen was a woman called Ella Egta. And Ella used to work at Beg. She came over to kind of run the office and everything, work with Jim at, I'm sure you've met her, Mark, the years. She was working, kind of running the office, and her husband, John, used to work at the Frig. And unfortunately, as he kind of retired, he had quite an aggressive cancer. Wasn't doing very well, and my parents are both nurses, and so they would kind of district nurses, so they would go into this home and look after him. And so obviously Ella, John, my mum and dad, they always had a good relationship, and John passed away, was very grateful for the kind of care that they had given. So through the that kind of relationship, obviously asking about family and all that kind of stuff, and I just dropped out of university and didn't clue what I was going to do with my life, and I still don't. But I was actually looking. Came back to the island, came back home, and I was doing kind of odd jobs and stuff. And Ella said, "I'll Adam come down and see me at the distillery," and so I did. And she was, she had basically put in a really good word and got things set up. So I was able to start. I was to work and was able to start in the shop. So I've worked with Mary McGregor at the shop. We kind of learned the tours, and again that first day I went in, and Jim sat me down and told me the lay of the land and how things were going to be, what was expected of me, and all that kind of thing. And the rest is history. Just wanted to be part of what Bruichladdie was doing, and 20 years later. So that's the story. That's how I got into it. That was my first job.
Of course, Adam wound up becoming the head whiskey maker for Bruichladdie when Jim McEwen retired several years ago. Thanks to Adam for sharing that story with us, and we will be sharing more of those How I Got That First Job stories in the coming months. If you have something you'd like to see us look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Don't forget we have 2 Happy Hour live webcasts coming up this Friday night at 5 p.m. New York time and 8 p.m. New York time. I hope you can join us. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Just like the end of this WhiskyCast episode, Dewar's Double Double always makes for a smooth finish. Keep an eye out for a bottle of Double Double 21 year, and here's to a very happy new year.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.